The winter sky over East Anglia was a pale, heavy gray that morning in 1944, the kind that seemed to swallow sound and time together. In the wide concrete expanse of the U.S. 8th Air Force Base, engines coughed and growled to life beneath a curtain of fog. Ground crews moved like ghosts, their khaki jackets darkened with oil and frost, tightening bolts, loading ammunition belts, and checking the fuel tanks of the massive B-17 flying fortresses that waited with metallic patience. Every man on the airfield knew what those four-engine giants meant. Survival was a question of weather, flak, and luck. Inside one of the briefing huts, the smell of burnt coffee and cigarettes hung thick. Dozens of airmen crowded around a map pinned to the wall. Red string traced a route over the North Sea, across occupied Holland, into the heart of Germany. The target, an industrial city producing ball bearings for the Luftwaffe. A familiar mission, at least on paper. Yet as the operations officer's voice droned over the sound of a crackling radio, something in the room felt different, heavier. A nervous cough, a glance exchanged between friends. The kind of silence that happens when every man senses something he can't name. Among them sat Captain Thomas Hale, a 26-year-old pilot from Ohio. Hale was known for his calm. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his crew listened. They called him the teacher because of his habit of explaining every step, every adjustment, even when the bombs began to fall. To his right sat his co-pilot, Jack Rowan, a wiry man with sharp blue eyes and a perpetual grin. Rowan had already flown 22 missions, and each time he came back laughing about the odds. "Same route, different hell," Rowan murmured as they left the hut. Hale smiled thinly but said nothing. Behind them, the sky was lightening to a dull silver. The mission would begin at 0600 hours. By 0555, 10 bombers of the 339th Squadron were rolling down the runway in tight succession. Their formation, codenamed the Vanishing Squadron by other crews for their uncanny luck, had flown together since late 1943. They had survived storms, flak, and fighter swarms that shredded other groups apart. Some said they had a guardian angel. Others joked that their navigator had sold his soul for clear skies. But beneath the jokes was respect. No crew was tighter, no formation cleaner. At the control tower, Major Daniel Carter watched through binoculars as the last plane lifted into the mist. "Godspeed, boys," he whispered, marking their departure in the mission log. None of them knew it would be the last time any of the 10 bombers would be seen again. Over the North Sea, the weather shifted fast. A front moved in from Norway, rolling thick banks of cloud and sleet into their path. Instruments flickered. Frost crawled across windshields. Radio chatter turned patchy. "Eagle 1 to formation. Keep tight. Climb 2,000 feet." Hale's calm voice cut through static. They obeyed. The fortresses climbed into brighter air, bursting through the upper cloud layer, where sunlight struck their wings with silver fire. For a moment it was beautiful. Then the first warning came from the tail gunner of Lucky Mary. "Bandits! 6 o'clock high!" Black dots swarmed out of the distant haze. Messerschmitts. The Luftwaffe had been waiting. Gunfire erupted. Tracers streaked the sky. The calm gray turned to chaos as machine gun bursts tore through wings and fuselages. Hale's bomber banked hard left, engines screaming. He could see one of the other planes, Liberty Bell, burst into flames and spiral down. "Jesus, there goes Barker," someone yelled over the intercom. Hale's voice stayed level. "Hold formation. Navigator, give me bearings." Amid the smoke and flak, they kept the diamond formation. They dropped their payload over the target, an industrial complex near Kassel, then turned west, heading home. Their fuel gauges dipped low. Their radios hissed with static. Half of the formation was gone, scattered or destroyed. At 9:30 hours, the ground station in England received a faint signal. It was Hale's voice, breaking through a wall of interference. "Eagle 1 returning. Heavy damage. Cloud cover. Engine 3 out." Then silence. Carter leaned over the operator's shoulder. "Try again! Get him back!" The operator turned the dials. Only static answered. By 9:45, Radar showed the squadron over the North Sea. Then, nothing. The dots vanished from the screen as if swallowed by the air itself. For 3 days, search planes scoured the water. Debris, oil slicks, and wreckage were expected. Nothing appeared. No parachutes, no distress signals, just empty sea and cloud, as if the 339th Squadron had been erased. The U.S. Air Forces listed them as MIA. Families were notified. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at the Hale household in Ohio, neat and impersonal. The War Department regrets to inform you. The air was thin in the mountains of central Norway when Dr. Eleanor Voss arrived in the winter of 1972. The war had been over for nearly 3 decades, but traces of it clung to the land like scars under snow. Rusted barbed wire still framed old German outposts. Concrete bunkers overlooked the fjords. Villagers still spoke in low voices about the occupation years, about the soldiers who came and went, about the strange things the Germans built deep in the forest, airstrips that never appeared on any map, and caverns sealed with steel doors. Voss carried little more than a notebook, a film camera, and the letter from the Norwegian woman who claimed her father had seen the squadron. The woman's name was Liv Haugland, now in her 60s, living in a small cottage overlooking the Trondheim's fjord. When Voss arrived, Liv greeted her with wary kindness, as if she had been waiting years for someone to finally believe the story. "I was 10 years old," Liv said, pouring tea that steamed in the cold. "It was early spring, snow melting, river swollen. I remember the noise first, not like our planes. Lower, slower. My father ran outside, thought maybe it was an Allied raid. But they came from the west, not the south. 10 planes, flying in a line, so close I could see the glass noses shining." Voss leaned forward. "You're sure they were American?" Liv nodded. "I saw the stars on their wings, but something was strange. No sound of guns, no smoke, no formation breaks, just silent. Then they disappeared into the clouds over the ridge." The ridge, she mentioned, was known locally as Blåfjellet, the Blue Mountain, a stretch of wilderness so remote that even now it was barely accessible by road. German forces had occupied the region during the war, constructing radar stations and air defense batteries. If the bombers had crashed there, their remains might have been hidden under decades of snow and forest growth. Voss convinced Liv's nephew, Arne, a local guide, to take her up the mountain. It took 2 days of hiking through snow-choked valleys before they reached the ridge. There, amid the wind and silence, Voss found what she had been hoping for and dreading: a scatter of metal fragments embedded in the rock, twisted and half-buried, their surfaces dulled with rust. She brushed away the snow and saw faded stenciling: U.S. Army Air Forces. Her heart pounded. After 28 years, the first confirmed trace of the Vanishing Squadron had surfaced. But there was more. Arne called her over to a cliffside hollow, where a partial fuselage section jutted from the ice. Unmistakably, the tail of a B-17. The serial number was still legible. It matched Eagle 1. Inside the wreckage were relics frozen in time: a torn flight jacket, a rusted .5 caliber machine gun, and fragments of a radio headset. But there were no bodies, no human remains at all. It was as though the crew had vanished before the crash. The Norwegian government secured the site, and word quickly reached the United States. Newspapers ran headlines: "World War II mystery bomber found in Norway." For a few weeks, the world's attention turned to the icy mountains. Families of the missing men wrote letters to Voss again, begging for closure. The U.S. Air Force sent a small recovery team to investigate. Among them was Colonel James Reeves, a veteran pilot who had flown escort missions during the war. He had known some of the lost crew personally. "If Hale's plane is here, the others can't be far." For several weeks they combed the area. The team found traces of 2 more aircraft, fragments scattered miles apart, each with different serial numbers from the 339th Squadron. But the pattern made no sense. The wrecks were too widely spaced, suggesting not a crash in formation, but a gradual disintegration, as if the bombers had fallen one by one over a great distance. Then, something stranger emerged. Deep within one of the wrecks, Reeves's team discovered a half-burned mission log sealed in a metal canister. The writing was water-stained but legible. The last entry read, "April 15, 1944, 0940 hours. Fuel low. Radio out. Formation holding steady. Heading unknown. Hale still calm. Says we're following the lights." Following the lights. Voss reread the words a dozen times. What lights? There were no recorded sightings of flares or navigation signals in the area that day. Yet the phrase echoed other accounts she had found. The pilot who spoke of strange reflections in the clouds. The German observer who described silent planes moving east like ghosts. The investigation closed quietly in 1973. The official conclusion stated that the bombers had become disoriented, lost radio contact, and crashed due to fuel exhaustion. But the classified report, which Voss later obtained through a leaked copy, mentioned an anomalous radar signature detected by German coastal stations that same morning. A cluster of 10 aircraft moving erratically, vanishing suddenly from radar near the Norwegian coast. The report ended with one chilling note. Phenomenon consistent with electromagnetic interference or unknown atmospheric event. By the 1980s, the Vanishing Squadron had drifted into legend again, yet for Eleanor Voss, it became an obsession. She continued her research quietly, long after official interest had faded. Her office in Washington, D.C. became a museum of clues, fragments of fuselage, maps covered in red string, photos of the lost men pinned beside their letters home. One evening, while reviewing wartime intelligence debriefs, she found something she had somehow missed. A German document from April 1944 described an emergency landing of an unidentified B-17 in northern Germany, intact, with its crew missing or evacuated. The report had been confiscated by Allied intelligence after the war and buried among hundreds of captured records. Voss requested the document. When it arrived, she froze. The serial number matched one of Hale's squadron bombers, Lucky Mary. The report claimed the aircraft had landed almost perfectly in an open field near Lübeck. Locals recalled seeing it glide down without engine power, wheels extended. When German troops reached it minutes later, they found no crew. Every seat was empty, parachutes still stowed, switches in their flight positions. The radio was on, transmitting nothing but static. Witnesses said the aircraft had circled once before descending, as if guided by an invisible hand. Incredibly, the Germans towed the bomber to an airstrip and examined it. Technicians reported no damage other than fuel exhaustion. The interior showed signs of recent use, half-eaten rations, logbooks still warm to the touch. Then, according to the report, the aircraft was quietly dismantled and shipped to a Luftwaffe research facility. What happened next was lost to history. Voss's pulse quickened. If one bomber landed intact, could others have done the same? Could some of the men have survived?
She traced a series of post-war testimonies from civilians across Europe who claimed to have seen ghost planes drifting silently at dusk, low and steady, before vanishing into cloud. One account came from a shepherd in Bavaria who swore a silver bomber passed overhead months after the war's end, engines dead, lights flickering. He told interviewers it was like a bird that forgot to fall. As the pattern deepened, so did the mystery. Voss began to suspect that the Vanishing Squadron's final flight had been part of something more complex than navigational error, perhaps an experimental mission, an attempt to test radar evasion or electronic interference technology. After all, 1944 was the height of secret innovation on both sides: radar jammers, decoy planes, countermeasures designed to bend waves of light and sound. She contacted surviving officers from the 8th Air Force Command. Most dismissed her theories politely, but one man, General Carter, now in his 80s, agreed to meet her in a nursing home outside Baltimore. When she mentioned Hale's name, his eyes sharpened. "You're still chasing them. I thought the Air Force buried that file for good." "What do you know, General?" He sighed. "I know that the 339th wasn't on the roster that day. Officially, their mission didn't exist." "What do you mean, didn't exist?" "They were ordered to Kassel, yes, but the coordinates they were given were wrong. Someone changed the orders last minute, higher up. When we tried to find out who, the trail went black. After the war, the British mentioned an experiment, something about radio blackout navigation. Never confirmed. The last thing we heard from Hale's plane was static strong enough to knock out half the sector's communications." "Are you saying they were part of a secret test?" "I'm saying someone used them, and when it went wrong, they erased them." His words haunted her for years.
In 1991, satellite mapping of the Norwegian coast revealed something unexpected. Beneath a frozen lake not far from Blofelten, metallic anomalies matching the dimensions of multiple aircraft fuselages. Voss, now nearing retirement, returned to Norway one last time with a joint team of researchers and military archaeologists. When they drilled into the ice and lowered a camera, the images were astonishing. Silhouettes of bombers resting upright in the dark water, preserved by the cold. 10 of them, in near-perfect formation. Inside Eagle 1, they found a skeleton still strapped in the pilot's seat. The remains were identified through dental records as Captain Thomas Hale. His hands were still on the controls. The oxygen mask was in place. The rest of the crew compartments were empty. But something else lay in the cockpit, a small sealed envelope wedged behind the instrument panel. Written in Hale's precise handwriting were the words, "To whoever finds us." Inside, a single page. April 15th, 1944, 10:22 hours. We lost the sun. Compass dead. Radio only static. Lights ahead moving east. Following them. Feels wrong. Men calm, too calm. Maybe something in the air. If this reaches anyone, tell them we tried to come home. The note ended there, no signature. The discovery shook the world. Newspapers ran headlines, "Vanishing Squadron found after 47 years." The story became a global phenomenon, sparking documentaries, debates, and theories ranging from experimental radar fields to supernatural phenomena. But to Voss, the truth was simpler and sadder. The men had flown into a storm of confusion, human and mechanical. The interference that crippled their radios, perhaps caused by early radar experiments, may have altered their navigation instruments, sending them east instead of west. The lights, Hale described, could have been aurora reflections or German search beacons leading them toward the mountains. In the end, they did what soldiers always do. They followed orders,
even when lost in the dark. Voss stood by the recovered wreckage as it was lifted from the ice, watching sunlight strike the dull aluminum wings. "You found your way home," she whispered. The remains of the crews were buried with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Their epitaph read simply, "They vanished, but they did not fall in vain." In the years since, the story of the Vanishing Squadron has passed into quiet legend, a tale told by historians and dreamers alike. Pilots still say that on clear nights over the North Sea, you can sometimes see a faint glimmer of 10 silver planes flying east, their engines silent, their course eternal. Because some ghosts never crash, they just keep flying.